Hi, Asaf. It's nice to meet you.
Amir, how you doing?
I'm good. I'm going to make you the host right now.
Okay, all good.
Muted.
Okay, there you go.
All good. And so Selma is doing the intro, and then taking it from there. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And I spoke to Selma a little bit earlier. She has a whole thing planned out, so.
Okay. Whatever. I said, we have a good group, so we should make sure we have enough time for all the questions. So
Yeah.
that's fine. No problem.
Okay, good.
Not a problem at all.
What's going on?
Oh, and I'm also friends with Michael Schatz.
I know Michael also.
And were you talking about Selma Rothman?
Yes.
I know some. I know that. I feel like
So
I'm a member.
you're almost a member.
I feel like a member. Thanks for saying hi.
Hi, Susan.
Hi, Julie. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good.
Good. I'm glad to see you here
Why?
as opposed to anywhere else.
Oh. Hi, Malka.
Hi.
Hi, Donna.
Hey, Sue, how are you?
Good. Good.
Good.
How are you?
Good. How's your grandson?
He is delicious.
Yeah, that's great.
I was in another meeting at 5:30 and they FaceTimed me so that he would say, why do things on FaceTime to make him laugh, and it works.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So he was crying and I made him laugh.
Aw. Well, there you go. You have the magic charm.
Yeah.
We're heading out to St. Louis on Thursday. I can't wait.
Oh, nice. How are
Yeah.
your guys?
They're terrific. Plus, my younger daughter, who lives in California, is going to meet us in St. Louis. So it'll be wonderful.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hi, Lucy with no picture. And Michelle and Marcel and June and
Hi, Susan. How are you?
Hi, Susan.
Good.
Hi, Susan. This is Lewis.
Hi, Lewis.
How you doing?
All right.
Yeah.
Hi, Asaf. I don't know you, but hello.
How you
Hi,
doing?
Asaf, and welcome.
Thank
Hi,
you.
Asaf. I don't know you, but I think your grandfather was my rabbi for many years at OCJCC.
That was indeed him?
Yes.
Are you Sam's son?
No, I am Mitchell's son.
Oh, okay.
And I belong to Phoenixville B'nai Jacob Synagogue, and I think,
Okay, there we go. That goes a while back too.
yeah, that's about the time I remember that synagogue. Yeah,
It's a coming together, a reunion.
yeah, nice.
Rabbi Harold Ramorowski, he was a great rabbi. Your grandfather?
Yes, he was.
Yes. I mean, I need to put on the light. Yeah, there we go.
There we
That's
go.
much better, Louis.
Yes, she's trying to conserve energy. Yeah.
I understand.
Lights, cameras, action. It's okay.
Yeah.
No need to
Like,
put on lights on my account.
When I do it from my iPhone, it's much clearer, but it's on my laptop.
Jerry, your dog is very cute. He looked like he was having a conversation with you.
Your dog.
He looks like he's having a conversation with you.
Shalom, everybody.
Aren't you going on the Asaf?
No, I have a house committee at the same time.
Well, come down closer and say hello to everybody.
Who's there? Oh, hi,
Hi,
Julie.
Elliot.
Hi. Hi.
What?
Jerry Silverman, how you doing?
What?
Elliot Miller.
Elliot Miller,
Oh, Elliot, oh my, from Central High School.
Central High School, yes.
I remembered.
Finally, yes.
Julie, see, I know him too. Oh my God.
You are like an honorary member, Jerry.
I think I know half the synagogue, right?
Yeah, that's
Nice-
our,
nice to see
that's
you,
our
Elliot.
rival. I'm a Northeast grad.
Oh,
That's okay.
it's
Hi,
okay.
Wendy.
My sister went to Northeast, so it's okay.
Yeah, very proud to be a graduate, 1989 graduate.
You should be.
Yeah, so
It's still a very good school.
thank you. Thank you, Jerry. Means a lot. My uncle went to Central, class of 1957.
Hi, Selma.
Hi, Susan. Hi, Julie.
Hi,
Jerry. Hi, Jerry Silverman. What a treat. Oh my, I'm hugging you, Jerry. I'm hugging you. Oh, it's so good to see some of you. Lewis.
It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure.
Oh, it
Asaf,
really is.
Good to see you too, Selma.
Will
Yeah.
you need to make Selma co-host. I can't do it anymore because I'm a co-host.
Oh, okay.
So if you could make Selma co-host, thank you.
No worries. Okay, make
Come here, babe. Wait, come here.
So are you now a co-host?
I'm gonna check.
Selma, are you a co-host?
I'm checking.
Great job.
There we go.
I
There we go. Hello. Yeah, no, everybody could see Gretch.
chat. Let's see. I don't.
Yes, you're a co-host, Selma.
Good. As long as you see it, I'm getting there. Thank you.
You see Julie's dog?
Yes, that's Gretchen.
Hey, Gretchen, you want to meet Coach?
Yeah,
Look. Oh, what a nice dog there. Wow.
she's a black lab. She's a very sweet dog.
All dogs are sweet. Oh my God. Is that Randy?
I
In the
doubt
middle of
it.
the night,
Oh
Randy's
my
on.
gosh.
I wouldn't miss it. Hi, guys.
Hi, Judy.
Hi, Susan. Hi, Jewel.
Hi.
Thank you.
Hi, Randy.
Thank you for everything.
Hi, Don. No problem.
Yeah. All right, wait a minute. Let me get this so that I don't go.
Wait, aren't you in the middle of the night there?
Hi, dude. No, you're not. We are.
I sat in the middle of the night there. How was the flight?
Oh, fine. Absolutely fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
I was praying the whole time, so
Oh,
I
thank you. Well, it worked.
And how is your precious little girl?
Oh, she's just adorable. She's really adorable. Yeah. Yeah. It was worth the wait. Oh, I will. Should have sent you. Okay, I will. Thanks, Jude.
And give my
Yeah.
best to you also.
Oh, thank you, honey. Will do. Yeah.
I'm not sure if I can stay on the whole time. I haven't been feeling too well. So if I just you'll know, but I'm gonna do my best. I really want
Okay,
to.
I hope so. Yeah.
Hello, Randy.
Oh, well. Hi, Mart.
How you doing?
Here, Mart, I'll show you what it looks like
I
right
want to
now.
see.
There is, right, okay. It's too cold to go outside.
Oh.
How are you?
Great.
Hey, listen, we want shawarma from Yashki's.
Yashka.
Did Don send you a picture?
Yes.
We went there today, did you?
No, he from a previous trip.
Oh, no, we went there today.
What about
He
my
was supposed
Legenda
to
yogurt?
get to
What about Legenda yogurt?
No, where is that? I don't know
Half
that.
a block from Yashki
Oh,
It's-
we did
it's-
it in an ice cream place, but we were.
on Ben Yehuda.
So, you know.
A little closer to Dizengoff at the
We'll go back.
circle.
We'll go back.
Yeah.
I went to the bathroom at Dizengoff Center. I had to, you know.
Oh, that's funny. That is too funny.
How are you guys?
We're missing you because we're so happy.
The audience is international tonight.
All good.
Hey, Randy,
How are you?
Randy, look who's looking at you.
Oh.
Hi, Booby. This is like a reunion. I love it.
I'm off to your good headquarters, underground.
Is that Menachem Begin?
Are you part of the
Hey.
Stern Gang?
You know, Stern is alive and well.
Oh, God.
You know Don too, huh?
Marty sees Don and he thinks Jabotinsky. That's what he thinks. It's Don Jabotinsky Sable.
I love it.
Where's the baby?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think if he had had his others, he would have been born then. He would have missed me and the kids, but I think he would have felt a different fulfillment.
Yes.
Really. Oh, hey, Donna.
Hi.
Here's Donna. Hi, Booby. How are you?
Hi, Donna Spector, too. We see Donna Spector.
Hi,
everyone.
Hi, Ran.
Hi.
And there's Chaya. There's Chaya and Judy
Hi, Booby.
and Renee and Lucy and March Bucksbaum.
Hello.
Good job.
Selma, it's like romper room.
Do you want to go
I see Selma. I see
Yes.
Wendy.
Hillary, what are you saying? Oh, look at that picture, the Green family. Look at that picture of Beth Shalom.
What?
Say so.
Oh.
You just said Green found the picture
Okay,
best
fine.
now. Say so.
I see Renee Fidos and Robin Katz.
Hi,
We
Robin.
were walking on Shabbat and saw your daughter.
Aw,
We talked to her about Ramat Beit Shemesh.
you did. Oh,
You
good.
mentioned
Yes.
She wants Aliyah.
That's great. She's really,
Her
she
name's
doesn't know where
Selma.
she's gonna land yet.
We have family in Ramat Beit Shemesh. I want to fix her up with them.
I have family in Beit Shemesh as well, but
It's all pictures of you. Go
what-
ahead, go ahead.
you know, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, like what?
That's right. But the guy we know there is an electrician.
Oh, no,
And
that's important.
Robin said, we need that.
That's very important.
Recording in progress.
Yeah. Hi,
Asaf,
Joe Teller.
Hey,
Steve
Robin.
Katz sends his love.
Okay, where,
Hi,
where,
Steve
where, where,
Katz.
where is he?
You know, I
Hiding?
don't know. I'm not sure
How
where
many more
he is.
people? Go ahead.
He might
Okay.
be in Miami, but
Okay.
48, yeah, go ahead.
I'm glad
Isn't
to
there a
see
way
you.
to do it?
Yeah, he said, tell Asaf
Here, go in this.
I said hello.
We're gonna hear
and
each
I'm
other.
gonna miss him
I
tonight.
sent him an
All right.
email, so
Oh, here's
I'll
Spyro.
wait when he gets back.
Okay.
We have some celebrities before you start. We have some celebrities here.
Oh, we want to see them.
Oh my.
Tender onion.
And just so happens that Theodore Herzl's in the house too, okay?
Don, we want to see the baby. Where's the baby?
And lastly, we can't leave out my guy, Menachem Begin, okay? Menachem. You better talk about the King David and say nice things.
Don,
Where
what
is
we
it?
really want to see is the baby. That's what we want to
Where's the
see.
baby?
Forget
Where's
all
the, let's see the Tinoket. The Tinoket. Come on.
That's the question. Where is the baby?
Wait a minute. Oh my
Rob,
God.
when is your daughter due?
Oh, let me
Mine?
see.
Yes.
Wait a minute.
March 13th.
Oh, wonderful. My name is on
Very
this.
Oh, there's
Yeah.
the Tinoket.
There we go.
Oh, we see the baby. What a beautiful baby.
She's beautiful.
We get
Beautiful.
to see her on Facebook. A lot of
I
people
Yes.
think with her, with the
I want to
Eagles.
see the baby live.
Hi, Don.
And who is in heaven? Let me just, last
Hi.
one.
Hi, how are
Hey,
you?
Kaya.
Oh, look at Safta and the baby.
Hi.
Oh, she's beautiful.
I think she resembles Randy. I see a family resemblance. She's
Are you getting
beautiful.
much sleep, Randy? Are you getting much sleep?
Last one, and then we're done.
Not right now.
Lynn Oxenberg, 1,000 words.
That's her whole reason to be there.
Exactly.
We usually do this to
How old
God
is
even
she
go.
now?
That's
How old
nice.
is the baby? How old is the baby now?
You get it, all right?
Couple months, right?
Convection oven, sure. My camp is not great.
6 months.
Thank you for asking. Sorry, I was.
Oh, they're now.
Convection oven.
Yeah.
You can use the convection oven however
Yeah.
you're training. It's going to be slightly different.
Convection oven, what's with that?
Someone has
Yeah.
something on about a convection oven.
Convection oven
TV is on.
will be
Nala.
Gotta end.
less time. So
If you're,
You better
when we
mute
get ready to
people.
put these in the oven.
this is not a cooking demo tonight, so if you could mute that convection oven piece, thank you. Okay. We are expecting quite a large number of attendees this evening. From what I've been told from Julie Atchik, we are going to have approximately 90-some attendees tonight, which is absolutely fabulous. So I'm waiting a minute or two more, and I will get started in about 1 minute. I'm going to be your hostess this evening. Most of you know me, and my name is Selma Rothman, and I'm really thrilled to see this wonderful crowd here.
Soon.
And I'm particularly joyous to welcome the Sables who are on with us this evening from Israel Direct, and I'll mention that again in a few minutes. Thanks to Randy Sable and Ivy Mermelstein, we have this wonderful Israel Engagement Committee here at Beth Shalom Congregation. And I think their dedication to wanting to educate our congregation and engage them more in learning and being involved in Israel is absolutely outstanding. I would say to you that both Ivy and Randy are doing that because this evening, both Randy and Ivy are presently in Israel, both of them visiting their children and grandchildren. Talk about taking Israel engagement to a new level. They're doing it. We thank them for arranging this first of a series of learning experiences focusing on Israel. And I want to give special thanks to Julie Atchik, who makes all this possible for us as our Director of Program and Etgar at Beth Shalom. So with that, I'd like to say shalom and welcome to everyone. I want to tell you that tonight's program is about... I'm going to ask that everyone please mute themselves. There will be opportunities to ask questions. You may write your questions in the chat box, and at various times during the evening, we'll have a chance to hear some answers to those questions. This evening, we are fortunate and blessed to have with us Dr. Assaf Ramorowski. Dr. Ramorowski is the Executive Director of Scholars for Peace in the Middle East. He is also a senior resident, a senior non-resident research fellow at the Begin Sadat Center for Strategic Studies. And in addition, a professor affiliate at the University of Haifa. Dr. Asaf was trained as a Middle East historian. He holds a PhD in the Middle East and Mediterranean Studies from King's College in London. I must add to that I have, and Marty, my husband, have a special connection to Dr. Ramorowski. When Marty and I were growing up in Northeast Philadelphia, and some others on the screen are from the Northeast too, we were actively involved in area synagogues. In fact, Dr. Assaf Ramorowski's grandfather, Rabbi Harold J. Ramorowski, married us. Marty used to babysit for Asaf's father, Rabbi Mitchell Ramorowski, and that's his claim, one of his claims to fame. I was fortunate to be the USY advisor for Mitchell Ramorowski at OCJCC. To this day, our families remain friendly with the Ramorowski family members and meet up with them at joyous times. We're ready to hear from Dr. Ramorowski and learn more about Israel. I just want to say that part of the committee's goal and aim is to educate us, not just this evening, but going forward. I'm going to give one quote just for you to think of before Dr. Ramorowski takes it away. Israel, and this is a quote from Shimon Peres, in Israel, a land lacking in natural resources, we learn to appreciate our greatest national advantage, our minds. Through creativity and innovation, we transformed barren deserts into flourishing fields and pioneered new frontiers in science and technology. But now, I want you to sit back and let's hear more about the years prior to 1948 and the founding of the state. Don't forget to put comments and questions into the chat. Thank you. Please, Dr. Assaf Ramorowski, we're ready to hear your words.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome, Selma, and thank you for the kind words all around. It's great to see so many friendly faces, familiar faces. It's like a homecoming to come here. So
yes,
it's a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to doing something in person at some point in the near future. But it's nice to connect on Zoom, and of course, I want to thank Don and Randy for staying up as late as they are in Israel time, but I guess they're jet lagged or whatever, and of course for Ivy, who's made all of this happen, and she's somewhere also in Israel. So I appreciate the opportunity all around. When Ivy and I were thinking about this concept of this program and the committee, I think that the idea was to tackle some of the issues regarding the pre-state leading up to 1948. This will be a kind of an opening to some of those issues, and then there will be part two, which will go into 48 going forward. So given the amount of people that we are here tonight, I'm gonna talk for I would say about 25 to 30 minutes or so, and then we can go into Q&A and we can ask as many questions as we have along the way. I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to see, I just want to pull up a one of my PowerPoints here, and then take it from there. Let's see if this works. Share screens. Can everybody see this this shared screen?
Yes.
Great, awesome. Okay, great. So as I was thinking about this whole conversation tonight, it dawned on me that one of the things that is missing from the conversation, and a lot missing during the debate about Zionism in general, but I think, one of the foundational documents that I think does not get enough attention is the Balfour Declaration. The Balfour Declaration, which I'm sure many of you have heard about and know about, issued on November 2nd, 1917, has a much more clearer and much more needed detail in the contextualizing as it relates to the document itself. Document itself is over 100 years old. It doesn't get enough press, I would say, as it should be getting press in the Zionist conversation dialogue today. But I will tell you that every day every year since the document has been issued, in the modern era in particular, and this going back to really 2 years ago, 3 years ago, the Palestinian Authority continues to sue or attempts legal action against the British government for issuing the Balfour Declaration altogether. So that, I think, is a critical, quite a telling point about how they feel and the significance of the Balfour Declaration. So let me try to explain why I think this is something we need to dive into leading up to some of the, the issues I'll talk about tonight. Many of you know that one of the first Zionist congresses were convened by what were the preamble to the political parties of Israel today. Theodor Herzl, one of the main conveners of the issue, was able to convene the Zionist Congress in 1897, the late 1800s, and subsequent Congresses came together with the idea of tackling the concept of a Jewish homeland. What does a Jewish homeland actually mean? What is its character going to look like? All of us have heard about the temporary Uganda plan that was an outgrowth of Herzl's Alt-Neuland. The idea of removing Jews from interaction with the non-Jewish Gentile community in order to reduce or squash opportunities of anti-Semitism, which of course shaped Herzl's life later in life as a result of the Dreyfus case. But if you talk about successes and achievements, the Congress itself did not achieve anything that really one could point to besides bringing Zionist groups together. Again, no small achievement in itself. Obviously, all of us know that, even today, you get at least 5 Jews in the room, you get, 15 different opinions. But the idea that you could, what are the monumental kind of outcomes of the... Everybody hear me? Okay. That you can actually point to, the Balfour Declaration has much to offer. And let me try to explain this. So the Balfour Declaration, just pointing out the language that we have here tonight, this is the critical part of all of this at large. Of course, the letter was issued by Balfour to Rothschild, his friend. And the critical part, and the second paragraph, and I'll read here, is basically that His Majesty's governments view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. Again, this is one of the critical sentences that needs to be highlighted and underscored. This is the first international recognition of Jews to have their own homeland. The fact that Jews are seen as a people, and the fact that they deserve to have a state like any other state, is only because of the Balfour Declaration. And I continue forward, and I will use the best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object. Understood that should nothing be done with any prejudice to civil religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. Of course, this relates to the how Jews would treat other individuals living in the area itself, or as it continues on, the rights of political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. Now, of course, the document itself does not talk about characters or borders intentionally about what this Jewish state would look like, but this was issued as the first international achievement that there is actually, that can be said that, that there was international recognition by a great power that Jews deserve to have their own state. This, to my mind, and to the mind of many other historians, is probably the single most diplomatic achievement in the 20th century that the Zionists have ever had. Since the convening of the Zionist Congresses. And this document itself, and it needs to carry much more weight. Much of this, the backstory of this, is also critical to understand. One of the main key players of all of this was no other than the first president of the state of Israel, Chaim Weizmann. Chaim Weizmann was a biochemist who was very close to the British elite. And really, if you look at a little bit of the psychological history and timing of all of this, it's really about people that we do know and and interact with, and the timing worked out well for Weizmann when he came together to talk to people like Balfour, like then Prime Minister Lloyd George, and others who were all Christian Zionists. And let me be clear here about the terminology here. These are Christian Zionists, not in the contemporary terminology of Christian Zionists that we talk about the Christian right today. These were people who studied the King James Bible and knew it by heart. And actually, they saw it as their Christian obligation and duty to fulfill the chosen people's right to find a Jewish homeland. And so that was part of the impetus that led Balfour, who was clearly a Christian Zionist, to come and bring this together, and make this happen. One of the people that were lesser known in this whole story was Nahum Sokolov. I'm sure that those of you who are now in Israel know of Sokolov Street, but most Israelis don't even remember who Sokolov was. Besides having a street named after Sokolov. But Sokolov was basically Weizmann's right-hand person. He was the key person who went around and made this happen. I will also contextualize all of this, and make note of 1917 here. 1917, and everybody should be note of, the British did not have control of mandatory Palestine. So they are making a commitment here to a land that's not in their possession yet. And so that's also, worth noting here about what the British thought about making this happen. While the Balfour Declaration itself was issued by the British, there were other Balfour-like declarations issued. The British would not issue this on their own. There was one issued by the Vatican. There was one issued by the French. There was one issued by the Italians, and a similar document even issued by us here in the United States. There was a need to create, or at least the British at the time understood that they were seeking international support to make this happen. But as you can see, when the Balfour Declaration was actually issued, and this was actually happening during the pogroms in Russia, the impetus for the declaration itself was more for Russian Jews who were escaping the pogroms than they were for British Jews. And so when the flyers were all issued and flown all over London, it didn't make such much a splash as it did, and the intent was really to help Russian Jews to understand that they have a place to go to. So that's also part of the political calculus that needs to be also contextualized here as well. This is part of this of the story itself. Balfour, is the tall man in the middle here when he goes to Israel. And he, unlike other leaders, actually went to see what he has accomplished and achieved. And this was part of his goal in making this happen. It's also worth noting that this is also when he makes it to Jerusalem here. And this was also after around the same time where the British also get to Jerusalem, and Allenby enters Jerusalem at the same time as well. So there's a culmination of a lot of critical factors here that are coming together at the same time. But the Balfour Declaration, again, one cannot minimize from its significance. I will quote, a quote that I think that individuals, everybody here would appreciate. Everybody remembers Abba Eban. Abba Eban, who was one of the more prolific spokesmen for the state of Israel. Abba Eban, and I quote here, declared the Balfour Declaration, the most decisive diplomatic victory of the Jewish people in modern history. And I agree. I mean, I think this is one of the more interesting, the more critical parts that gets lost into the mix of the historical issue. But again, as I said before, the Allied powers that were involved in this, as far as the Brits, the French, Belgium, the Russian, the Italians, and then later on the United States, cannot be minimized from the larger context of the story itself. But the British do get credit, and again, the credit that is well deserved, that Chaim Weizmann was able to make this happen. Sokolov gets lost in the story, and that's unfortunate. There was a lot of, I would say, envy. There was a lot of tension between Sokolov and Weizmann. Sokolov was the one who was sent to all these other countries, the Vatican, the French. He was the one who met with Mark Sykes, a la the same individual that was part of the Sykes-Picot agreement in 1915. These are all individuals that Sokolov went to meet with. Sokolov was a great diplomat. But even in Weizmann's memoirs, and his wife's memoirs in particular, she actually highlights the envy that Sokolov was getting to do all these things. And so he tried to marginalize Sokolov. And again, in the collective historical memory, when you talk about the Balfour Declaration, people rarely think about Nahum Sokolov as the person who made this happen. But I will tell you, historically speaking and factually speaking, if it wasn't for the work that Sokolov did, there would be no Balfour Declaration, notwithstanding all the gravitas that Weizmann had. And Weizmann did have gravitas. Let's make no ifs and buts about it. Him being a biochemist led and helped the British win the war, as a result of that, there was within the British elite, a feeling that Weizmann deserves to have gratitude when it came to Zionism and what he was trying to do. But again, one also needs to put into context the other players that were involved in this at large.
Dr. Ramorowski, I just want to mention there's a book that some people may have read that is controversial it's called My Promised Homeland by Ari Shavit, where the author Ari mentions his great-grandfather, Peter Bentwich, who was one of the people that was part of the commission that came to look at the lands of Israel. At that time it was Palestine. And he talks about his role in that, Peter Bentwich, that other British representatives came as well as Sokolov or Weizmann.
Yeah, there were many others, and that's a good point. The Ari Shavit book is a different lecture altogether.
Oh yes, definitely. I only wanted to mention his great-grandfather, who was part of that group. That was my reference.
Yeah, there were many players, and that is worth noting about that were involved in all of this. They don't always get the credit, and this is again, I think, from the historical standpoint. People don't always get the credit, and there's a lot of history, as we know, is written by people, by the winners and the people who have access to the books. And so that's also part of the fun that goes with all of this.
Yes.
But it is, this is, there were a lot of individuals that that did not get enough credit when this was all happening. So, I mean, this is just to, to understand all of that. Let me just pull out here where, so we have a better sense of what we're talking about here. This will contextualize. So, this is part of, the map of the era that we're dealing with around this period of time. But more to the point, this is, of course, going a little bit forward. This is my good friend Herzl, as I mentioned before. Again, Herzl gets a lot of credit, due for making some of this happen. But again, in contrast to what the Balfour Declaration did, it kind of pales. So I think that's also important to, but obviously, you got to put this into context. So this is really, what I think is also for us to understand. So this is the political map of the Middle East in 1914. This is similar to what the British were looking at, when by the time they, leading up to 1917. All of this is, of course, happening on the collapse of the Ottoman Empire. Again, another point that's worth noting when it comes to the Balfour Declaration and why the Zionists were so successful in contrast to the Arabs. I will also note here that Jews were better lobbyists. We did a better job in lobbying and making this work for us. It was also the first time with the collapse of the Ottoman Empire after World War I that there was an opportunity to deal with a Western power. And so again, the advantage of dealing with European Jews who knew how to deal with European culture and politics worked to our advantage. It is worth noting that in 1916, the historical record talks about the another documentation as far as the Hussein McMahon document that the British promised then mandatory Palestine to the Arabs. Again, going back to the language of the Balfour Declaration, the British were playing both sides. They were diplomats. That's why they didn't commit to any lands, to any borders or character, but they committed in principle to the idea that this was the way it was supposed to be. By the way, as I started my remarks, the fact of the matter is that leading up to every commission that came to investigate Palestine up until 1948, the American, the Anglo-American, the British commissions that came in, San Remo, every commission that came to investigate the character and purpose and what the Jewish homeland could and should look like, always referenced the Balfour Declaration. And so that, as far as the cachet that Balfour had, the intent and the understanding when it came to the idea of a Jewish homeland for the Jewish people stems internationally from the Balfour Declaration. Again, this is also critical to understand when you try to put this within the context of the Arab narrative and the Arab-Palestinian narrative, for that matter, as it relates to the idea that Jews came out of nowhere to eradicate Palestinians or Arabs of the area, and then to a land that was no inhabitants. Not true. The idea, the Zionist Enterprise, and really this is also in a very critical historical, an important understanding of the historical record at large. The Arab Muslim world, till this day, I mean, even with the Abraham Accords, still the understanding of Israel's coming to fruition in 1948 only has to do solely focused on the fact that the Holocaust happened, with the argument that if there was no Holocaust, there would be no Jewish state. And so in every possible historical textbook and record by the Arab world, there was an attempt to minimize from the Holocaust, with the idea that if one minimizes from the Holocaust, it would minimize from the cachet of the existence of the state of Israel. Again, historically flawed and afactual, disingenuous, ahistorical, but it also, above all, belittles 100 years of Zionist history leading up to the creation of the state of Israel. And I will also note that it is critical to understand that while the Holocaust was indeed an impetus, the state of Israel, and this is a question that comes up again and again in debates that I have and other colleagues have between Arab scholars and others about this documentation, about the creation of the Jewish state itself. There would have been a Jewish state even without a Holocaust. By 1939, most of the majority of the land was already bought legally and purchased, and the creation of the government political environment was already created. It might have taken the Zionist enterprise another 10 years if it weren't for the Holocaust. The Holocaust was indeed a catalyst as far as global sympathy, but just to be clear about this, it was not only because of the Holocaust, which is exactly part of the Arab narrative that has been put out there, which, by the way, fast forward to the environment today, what makes the newly found recognition of countries like in the Gulf, just fast forwarding to the modern contemporary environment, acknowledgement of the Holocaust even more important, given the fact that they've been taught for years and been educated with an environment that has minimized from the Holocaust itself and from the centrality of targeting Jews. So I just want to put that also as a critical point there to understand, where this historical record and how this plays into the conversation. Let me just go here forward. Sorry, there's a lot to talk about, but let me try to get to the to the critical part of the area itself. So this is the Sykes-Picot agreement that I referenced back in 1915. This is leading up to how the area was going to be divided. Don, my friend Don Sable will note, that the international zone is, of course, Jerusalem. If you look at the, and so the precedent of where Jerusalem, the idea of an international city comes from, stems from a lot of these documentations. But this is where, the West starts to carve out the Middle East. Not necessarily logically or not necessarily culturally identity that matches the identity of the Middle East, but this is what leads up to the conversation and how this was going to be laid out. And this is really the beginnings of where the British involvement and the French involvement in the region itself play into, how they decided that they have control of over X, Y, and Z. By the way, for the British at the time, and this has been consistently true for the British as a naval empire, it was more important for the British to have control of Egypt vis-a-vis the Suez Canal than anything else. I mean, that was the critical part for them as it relates to the geopolitics of the empire. But again, this is where, so the critical part, really, and this is in more of a better kind of a map here that kind of looks at the British controlling, where the British control the area, where the French control the area, and where, and how this comes together, and really where the British really become the dominating force in the region itself. As it relates to their control of the region. But I would point out that, again, the Sykes-Picot documentation and conversations that were taking place, they were taking place before the Balfour Declaration. The Balfour Declaration, as I said it before, was making a commitment for land that was not theirs yet, but they had these preliminary documents of what it would look like. So they had enough hope and support that between these other kind of European allies, that eventually the British would indeed take possession of these areas. I mean, which again bolstered their ability to make these commitments. Again, nothing was set in stone, but this is where a lot of this came from as a result of those conversations. And Mark Sykes, who was representing, the British in these conversations, was very close to my friend, as I mentioned before, Nachum Sokolov. And again, he was a lot of this came from that as well. Our friend, this is the okay, but this is really what leads up to what I think is the most critical part. And by the time we get to the 1920s. Of where all of this plays into coming to fruition. 1920, the British already control the area. This is, mandatory Palestine, Transjordan, parts of Iraq, obviously Egypt. These are all influenced by the British, and the Jewish lobby and the Jewish enterprise in the area are appreciating and think that they have a good partner to make this happen as far as moving this along. And that was really, I think, where a lot of the support, and the motivation for the Jewish community to move this along. Again, the British relationship with the state of Israel was not a love affair, to say the least. There was a lot of Arab sympathies within the British higher echelon. And in the same way that the Zionists were lobbying for their own state, so were the Arabs. And the Arabs actually had states. And so when you talk about geopolitics, talking about the role of the black gold, otherwise known as oil, this is all plays into the conversation and trying to garner support as well as trust between the British and their newfound partners in general. But to their credit, I think this is part of the difference between dealing with the Turks, was that there was a better understanding of European politics amongst the Jewish community and the founding fathers, who came, a lot of them, from European societies, that they would know how to deal with this environment. I think that is another key element that played into this conversation. This is a figure that should not be minimized, and is a critical element within the pre-state era at large. This is Haj Amin al-Husseini, or otherwise known as the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem. The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, al-Husseini, to my mind, is probably the founder of Arab-Palestinian nationalism, not Yasser Arafat. The ideology of exterminationism as it relates to Jews comes from Haj Amin al-Husseini. Haj Amin al-Husseini, I'm sure many of you have seen or heard of the picture between Haj Amin al-Husseini and Adolf Hitler. Husseini was the one who trained the Muslim troops in the Third Reich. And the gist of the argument and the documentation that we have relates to the fact that Hussein, even after he was kicked out of Jerusalem, was basically of the mindset, even prior to that, that when he told Hitler that I have Jews, you have Jews, let's deal with them the way we should be dealing with them as far as the eradication of Jews, was the message that Husseini came with in general. These are the kind of conversations that Hitler had with people like Husseini. And Husseini, as the Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, had a theological position, but was a politicized individual all around. So case in point, as it relates to this story, I think is also worth noting as well. Some of you have heard me speak before and a little bit know about the work that I've done over the years, know that I have spent a great deal of time dealing with the Quakers. The Quakers who started working, all of you who live on the Old York Road corridor will appreciate the fact that KI is home to a lot of the Quaker documents, and people like Lessing Rosenwald, who was involved in the American Council on Judaism, had a house in Abington. And these individuals, many of them, others, the Quakers were also involved in the Middle East. And so the Quakers actually go to the Middle East. The Quakers, as pacifists, also had a proposal on the table that that the mayor of Jerusalem should be a Quaker as a pacifist, because they thought that they would know how to deal with the theological experience when it comes to Jerusalem. The reason I mention all of this story, which I think is is a whole a lot to be said about the involvement of the Quakers in general, but the Quakers go meet with Haj Amil Husseini, and they go meet with Haj Amil Husseini in Jerusalem because they believe that as a religious authority, he would understand the idea of the international concept of Jerusalem as a city that could be divided and also worshipped by all three monotheistic religions. The interesting part about the Quaker documents after that meeting was that the Quakers who went to meet, the delegation who went to meet with Haj Amil Husseini, left there very disgruntled and really felt that, and the comment that they used was that basically that al-Husseini is not a religious authority and is not as a politicized individual, and he's not somebody we can work with. And those are words that the Quakers would not use lightly. They were, again, every word that they used was very measured and very Quakerly, to use their phraseology, about how they treated religious figures all around. But that was their interpretation of Haj Amil Husseini. But if you, it's fast forwarding a little bit forward to how this plays out here. I mean, so the Brits divide up the area, and this, continues our story. And again, all stemming from Balfour going to where we are now. These are areas that that were designed, by the mandated areas. You can see where the French are, where Iraq is. And the areas remaining for the national homeland. Again, this relates to the area of Palestine as the divided area between the two sides of the River Jordan, as far as how they play this out. So you can see here that the carving and the land is getting smaller as a result of the British. This is also part of the preamble to many of these proposals of the land, as it relates to the British negotiating, as it relates to us negotiating, the Americans, the Arabs, and others who got involved. Where all these maps come from has to do with the British controlling the area. Syria was entirely French. And that was something that the British wanted to stay away from. But you can see the influences playing out here. As it relates to where the British, again, the proximity to water and junctures related to import-export were more critical to the British than anything else. Again, as far as the centrality of Palestine during all of this. Selma, how am I doing on time?
You're doing very well. I think if anyone has a question and would like to put it either in the chat or raise their hand, we'll pay attention to that as well.
We can do that.
Yes, yes.
Are there questions before I talk for a living, so we can be here all night long. But if there are questions, related to what I've said up until now, I'm happy to tackle some of them. I'm just trying to lay the groundwork for part of this entire period of time.
There is one question about the UN RWA that Don Sable would like to ask, and I think I would like to just say I'm interested in finding out too about in 1939 when the white paper went into effect that affected immigration into the land. That's something I'd like to hear about.
Sure.
So Don, do you want to mention your question?
Sure, Randy unmuted me. Asaf, one of the main problems today, and you have written about it eloquently, I must say, is UNRWA and the fact that they perpetuate the only people that maybe any of us have ever known of who have been considered refugees 3, 4, 5, who knows how many generations later. Can you tell us, are you familiar with who was behind the creation of UNRWA? And is there a reason why the United States, I trust, did not object to that? Because it's a huge problem today, this agency. So I know it's a whole webinar you could do on it, but what can you tell us about the creation of UNRWA?
What's UNRWA?
So UNRWA stands for the UN Workers Relief Agency for Palestine Refugees. It is the UN agency, the UN body devoted to Arab Palestinian refugees. It is uniquely defined, according to to Don's point, only devoted to the Arabs of Palestine. UNRWA is, in contrast to its sister organization, the UNHR, which is the UN Human Rights Council, not to confuse with the UN Human Rights Commission, is devoted to refugees at large. UNRWA was created only for Arab Palestinian refugees. UNRWA comes in a little bit later in the game here, as it relates to where we are historically. UNRWA was created in 1949, and UNRWA was created, full disclosure, I've spent the better part of the past 20 some years devoting my research to dealing with UNRWA. UNRWA was created as a temporary organization, and I'm using the phraseology of the United Nations. The UN only comes about, really has in force in the post-World War II era. So when you talk about the United Nations at the time, you're talking about the world post-World War II. And it was created essentially by the Arabs for the Arabs, in that regard, and they've kept on redefining and defining who the Arab Palestinians are. What is unique about Arab Palestinian refugees is that they can inherit Arab Palestinian refugee status. It is the only population that one can inherit Palestinian refugee status. And they uniquely define Arabs of Palestine as anybody who was in mandatory Palestine between 1946 and 1948. Again, mind you, 2 years prior to the creation of the State of Israel. And the kicker is, and their descendants. Nobody else has that concept. Now, if we're being historically honest, for the first decade of UNRWA's existence, they tried to stay true to their mandate. They lost it after the first decade because they were based on voluntary contributions. The Arab world basically said to them, we will give you money, a lot of money, so long as you become the gatekeeper and of the Arab Palestinian refugees, and the blame is on you. Part of the creation and the existence of Arab Palestinian refugees has to do with the reality of 1948, and I know I'm stepping a little bit forward to our next section, but it needs to be contextualized to understand that 1948, according to the Arab narrative, is considered to be the Nakba, the catastrophe of Israel's creation. And the reminder of the Nakba of 1948 are the perpetual existence of refugees. And that's how the story has gotten from generation to generation. And here we are over 7 decades later, and they still continue to exist. I would say that it's more psychological than actually realistic as far as who are Arab Palestinian refugees. But it's a larger story that needs to be addressed. In a nutshell, let's just say one more word about this. I would argue, and I have, that the existence of Arab Palestinian refugees to this day, so-called refugees, is a guarantee that conflict will never end, because it's the one single issue that they can hang on to. If the conflict were solely about territory or about a shared capital in Jerusalem, those issues could have been resolved decades, centuries ago. The environment, the refugees, keep the conflict going. And so, in a nutshell, but if anybody wants to, I can recommend my book on the topic. It deals with the entire architecture of this enterprise.
So, for clarification, there are two additional questions. I'm going to go to Randy's talking about this. She's surprised about the shape of Jewish Palestine in this British Mandate 1922 map. I'm not sure that that's a. I'm asking on top of her question: is that Jewish Palestine or is that the
No, this is not.
vision? It is not. It's the vision of the British.
It's the vision. If you look
Yes,
at the
yes.
glossary of terms on the bottom,
Not Jewish.
that area is the area separated and enclosed to Jewish settlement. And as far as the, and the whiter part, is the area remaining for the Jewish home. That's, and again, these are all proposals that, again, that are theoretical. But this is how they drafted out the ideas. This did not, but this was how the land was looked at in the British documentation.
In addition, there's a question from Dr. Lewis Teller, and his question is pertinent to our discussion. Why did the Palestinians not want a separate state? And he continues on in his question to say, there is sympathy for them without looking at the whole picture. That's his commentary that he added after. Why did the Palestinians not want a separate state?
Okay, so let me just be clear here on the terminology, and I'm glad that Dr. Teller brought this up. The concept of what we talk about today in the colloquial language as it relates to Palestinians is not what we're talking about here, which is why I think we need to be very clear here about the populations we're talking about. What comprises the population as it relates to Palestinians within the modern day Arab-Israeli conflict does not come to play, really until, the 30s, and I would say even later until, post 1948, as far as Palestinian identity. You have in the area here, you have Arabs of the area, the inhabitants of the people who live in this area, known as the Mandate of Palestine, are Arabs who come from Saudi, the French, the Egyptians. And so they are Arabs of the area. The people who comprise this population are members of tribes. There are large Arab tribes that comprise the creation of Arab Palestinian identity. There are what known as the Nashashibis, the Husseinis, the Khalidis. These are all people that are moving around. If anybody here has watched the movie, if you have not, it's worth watching. When Peter O'Toole plays Lawrence of Arabia, the idea of the tribes of the area. And so there's a lot of movement going back and forth. The unification of the idea of Arab Palestinian identity really comes, within the animus and the hatred towards the creation of a Zionist enterprise. And so there is Arabs in the area who keep on moving back and forth. Actually, many of the landlords who sold the land to the Zionist enterprise didn't even live in the area. They lived in Syria, they lived outside of the area. And so this, so after the war itself, as the map is being drawn and redrawn again, there is a coalescing of the people of the area as the Arabs of Palestine. But let me be clear here. Palestine, as it relates in the documentation here, Palestine does not equal Palestinian. The British mandate called Palestine, there are Jewish Palestinians,
yes,
those who live in the area itself pre-1948. So the terminology has to be clear here about what populations we're actually talking about. And so as it relates to I think to the question that Dr. Teller was asking about the sympathy for Palestinians, that is a later day concept as it relates to the aftermath of 1948. By the way, let me also be clear that those Arabs of the area who did not flee as a result of the War of Independence, of the War of 1948-49, are the Arab Israelis. And so, leading up to the war itself, there was overtures by the Zionist leadership, by Ben Gurion, by Golda, and others who went around calling on the Arabs of the area to say, do not wage war on us. We've had good relations between Arabs and Jews in the pre-state era, and there were actually pretty decent relations, in some areas. And the idea was that there could, figure out some kind of change. That was not the message that came out of what I would call here, in quotations here, the Arab diaspora, which basically said, no, the message that came to the inhabitants of the area was, leave. Once we eradicate the Zionists, you can come back to your homes. When that foregone conclusion did not come to fruition, that's when the beginning of the refugee problem and the kind of the coalescing of Palestinian identity comes together. The hatred, does go back to Arab Palestinian nationalism to people like Haj Jamil Husseini in the 20s. Politically speaking, until the PLO and Yasser Arafat and company come about, this is more the political movement that comes in later on.
There's further clarification that Jerry Silverman would like to suggest, and that is that the Declaration of Independence for the State of Israel makes it clear how the non-Jews would be included and accepted. Can you speak to that, please?
Yes, and that's a very good question. And that was exactly, if you go back to, in the same spirit of the verbiage, so it makes it much clearer to what I stated early on with the Balfour Declaration about how they would treat the inhabitants of the area with dignity and respect. And the idea of, this is exactly part of the Declaration's call that also was echoing some of the overtures that were made to the Arabs of the area to not wage war on the small Jewish community. And again, in 1948, there was no guarantee that the aftermath would take place. This will come to fruition. The war began right after the vote on partition, and this is part of the story. But the idea was that there could be collaboration. Outside forces did not want this to happen, and again, part of the Arab identity that was the impetus for the seeds of the Arab-Israeli conflict was that they could not agree on many things amongst themselves. But one of the things that they could agree upon is their hatred towards Jews. So this is, again, part of what the glue that brought them together. Interestingly enough, these kind of modern day agreements, 242, another kind of thing that the Palestinian national movement called upon, are kind of been deflated as a result of Arab countries making peace with Israel, because part of the main mandate of by the Arab League was that no Arab country should make peace with Israel until there is resolution for the Palestinian matter. So here you are, fast forward to 2022, there is more normalization with Arab countries, notwithstanding the Palestinian issue, to tell you exactly where the centrality of the Palestinian issue falls on the list of priorities for the Arab world today.
You mentioned at one point that in your book you address some of these questions that are coming up. Would you put at some point your title of your book in the chat so that everyone can find it at some point? That would be helpful.
My book, I can send articles. I will say that my book tackles the Quaker and the refugee problem, mostly the refugee issue.
I saw that online. Yes.
And so it's unfortunately not a pop culture book, so it's not always cheap to buy. I don't want anybody to spend money, but I can send around articles and stuff that I've written, as well as documents that I've written, about the same research, if that will be easier.
That would be very helpful. Thank you.
No problem.
I had mentioned addressing the 1939
Oh, yes.
white paper. Could you mention something about the white paper?
Sure. So the white papers, not to mention, the adjectives describing where white papers were white books, had to deal with immigration to the area. And part of this has to do with the fact that there is a beginning, obviously, of Germany of the Nazi Party on the rise, and how this affects the British stance in the world. And there was a beginning of a limitation of immigration, which again began on the Zionist part, that began the illegal immigration, what is known as the period of the illegal immigration, and the period of what is known as in Hebrew, the phraseology related to do with a fence and an outpost, regarding the fact that creating Jewish settlements in the area to bring in illegal immigration. The Jewish Agency, the Jewish brigades are going to bring in the illegal immigration. This is part of the impetus that led, I'm sure many of you have heard Ben-Gurion's famous statement as it related to this period of time, that we need to fight the white paper like there was no Nazi Germany, and then we need to fight the Nazis like there was no white paper. And there's a whole architecture of trying to work within the confines of the political architecture. It's also in the 30s and 40s. There's a great deal of fighting between Jews and Arabs. The attempted neutrality of the British, and obviously, not to mention, I know Don mentioned early on the blowing up of the King David Hotel. These are things that did not sit well with the British. And so if you look at the British papers around the similar time, Jews are defined as terrorists, and there is a lot of tension going on, which again heightens the pressure on the Jewish community. But it's also, from an international relations perspective, the beginning of the end of the British Mandate. And so they're hanging on to dear life. By the time, if you fast forward to the, end of World War II, and the beginning of, the creation of the state and the British on their way out, this is all part of what, where they thought the British had creating their allies, again, going forward. I mean, this is the push and pull. It was not an easy time for the Jewish community, and it wasn't an easy time for the Arab community either. And so there was a lot of lobbying in these areas as it related to policies, and policies of self-defense, policies of a creation of governments, and within the local communities. I mean, that's that's the outside part of all of this. There was a lot of raids at the time, and there was a question of where the British were on a lot of these events that they allowed to happen or not. Again, you can use examples as the raid on Gush Etzion, the raid on the Hadassah Hospital. I mean, there's a series of attacks on Jewish communities by Arabs.
I think you're breaking up. Dr. Ramorowski, are you still there? Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I think he froze.
He's
Selma.
frozen.
I think he's frozen. So I'm just going to mention one or two things. There is a question in the chat box that I'll share with you while we're waiting for him to come back on. But I want to say that the answer to this question will probably be addressed in our next educational program on Israel because it's dealing with the future. It's a good question and one we need to think about. It's about that there are now 6 million Palestinian refugees and descendants of Palestinian refugee males, including adopted children, and they are all so eligible for registration as refugees. We'd like to hear from Dr. Ramorowski at the future session. What does your crystal ball see in 10 years plus from now? He wants to look ahead, and that is something we certainly want to address, but I'm going to leave that for the next session. I want to mention to you that I know Jewish people who were in the state of Israel prior to 1948 consider themselves Palestinians. They were living in the lands of, they were born as Jewish Palestinians. They were living in the land of Palestine when they were born, and they refer to themselves that way. I've heard that. It's not something that is totally uncommon to hear on the streets in Israel. When I first heard it, I was surprised too. Someone's Jewish and a Palestinian. They said, but I was born here in Palestine prior to 1948. I'm filling in right now, but I certainly would love anyone who has additional questions to feel free to ask. One of the things that I was curious about also, and somebody may have some input on this, the land was purchased by JNF. So over the years, that land is the Jewish land, and we were careful. We were similar to Abraham when he purchased the cave Marat HaMachpelah, and he wanted to make sure in the Torah that he paid for that cave. And they explain, the commentary on that is when... Okay, so I'm just saying one quickie thing, and I'm going to give it over to you. I'll make it short. Abraham insisted on, when he bought it from a man named Ephron, that he pay for it. So he could say, in future generations, I bought the land. It wasn't a gift, it is mine. So go ahead, Rabbi, Doctor. I think of your...
Wrong Ramorowski, many rabbis.
I know that. Lots of Rabbi Ramorowskis. Go ahead, Dr. Ramorowski.
So that's what happens when one loses power on my laptop. I forget to charge it, but didn't realize my laptop wasn't charging while I was talking. So I'm sorry. So we were in the midst of your question. So, and after the white papers, and
yes.
So where was the next question that we were on to?
The next question I want to reserve for the next time, because they're asking you, and I'll repeat it briefly, with all of the 6 million Palestinian refugees and their descendants and their children and adopted children who are all eligible for registration as refugees, use your crystal ball and look in the future in 10 years plus what that means, what effect will that have. But I'm going to ask you to please save it, and I will even forward it to you so you can address it. I want to, before we jump to 10 years in the future, I want to concentrate on understanding more about the history prior to 48.
Sure, no problem. So were there any other questions beyond the
and any others? I have a question, because we were talking to some friends in Israel today, and I asked them about Aliyah, the different Aliyot, Aliyah, Aleph, Aliyah, Bet. Could you talk about how those different immigrations of Jews into the land affected the eventual direction that Israel of today has?
The waves of immigration that came to Israel, in different periods of time, were also affected, where they came from. There were different waves and different generations. Russians, Poles, and others who came in with the idea of the Jews who came from socialist countries at the time. Part of the main impetus for anti-Semitism was the argument that Jews are not productive, or the lack of productivity that Jews had. And so the idea was that they would come to Israel and they would learn how to become agricultural, and become farmers. And so this is when, you see the beginning of creation of neighborhoods like Petach Tikva and other places, as far as drying the swamps and the malaria and others. And we learn about these elements, the agriculture. This actually goes back to, before the British's rise. I mean, many of you, I'm sure, remember or have heard the story of the Aronsons, and who was a famous, he dealt with the study. He was he dealt with irrigation, but he was also a famous. He dealt with the study of the land, and a lot of these individuals who were working with the Ottomans at the time also felt that they could, make, kind of make the desert bloom. There were a lot of politics that really led to all of these, what I would call co-ops that were created at the time. This is what, this is the impetus for the creation of communist kibbutzim, socialist kibbutzim, who came with the same kind of European ideology and tried to recreate it, repackage it within the Zionist narrative. I would also point to this issue in itself. What's missing from the conversation, and if you look, the history of a different kind of aliyah, the waves that came into Israel, that were allowed to come in and were limited. In the 40s and 50s, and I'm going a little bit forward, there was a conversation about American Jews and where are the American Jews in all of this. And Ben-Gurion and company would send delegations to the States to raise money and raise a great deal of funds about for the enterprise itself. One of the famous individuals, a group by the American Jewish Committee, which was created at the beginning of the 20th century by 1906 as an anti-Zionist group, were questioning Ben-Gurion's intentions, because Ben-Gurion came and called upon American Jews to say that American Jews have an obligation to come and move to Israel. And individuals like Jacob Blaustein and others said, what are you talking about? We're not convinced that the new Zionist enterprise is going to be democratic. You guys are all socialists and communists. And so the beginning of a back and forth that goes back an exchange of letters that leads to a field study mission of American Jews start coming to Israel in the 30s and 40s leading up to the 50s, has to do about the nature and character of the state of Israel, where American Jews argued that it behooves the state of Israel to become more democratic if they want the support of American Jews. The fact-finding missions indeed came to the conclusion that indeed there is enough seeds of democracy that would indeed, create that environment, but there was no guarantee of that. And so, especially in the 50s, where you saw a rise of communist kibbutzim. But these are the seeds of the people where they came from and what they envisioned in their minds of what Zionism was about. Not necessarily a religious Zionism, but more of a secular Zionism that played into the conversation. You're Selma, you're muted.
Susan Miller addresses the fact that she has cousins that from the United States immigrated, made Aliyah to Israel in the 1930s, and they co-founded a kibbutz in the Galil. They then returned to the U.S. to fight in World War II.
Yes,
So there were U.S. immigration happening, but I think in different number sizes than
Not,
some
not,
of
not,
the.
not in mass. I mean, there
Right,
was, you know,
right.
there was a highly recommended book to read, you know, and it was also a movie. Was a movie that Nancy Spielberg did, Spielberg's sister, about the pilots who came after World War II and helped actually win the war for Israel, because Israel had no air force. There is a great deal of individuals, not to mention the fact that the mob, people like Meyer Lansky and others who were involved in raising money for the Haganah and other monies that we know, as far as you know, it was appealing to the mob that, you know, Jews carrying guns and the idea of self-defense. I mean, so there is involvement. There is a huge amount of involvement, but you're talking about every wave, you know, related to your question, Selma, had its own character, its own nature, and its own culture that dictated exactly what they came with. And by the way, they were not all successful. People left disheartened. There were people who left, you know, and we're talking about how the land was desolate and they were fighting malaria, and it was not an easy process for them to leave and to come back. And so even in the days of Ben Gurion as a teenager coming to Israel, I mean, there were difficulties. I mean, it was not an easy life. And so the number started rising as anti-Semitism and pogrom started to grow, and Europe was becoming less of a safer place. And again, as Zionist politics were evolving in Europe as well, but it was not a straight, you know, it wasn't a straight, you know, forward kind of a way, an arrow, as how things played out. And people left and people came. I mean, so there is a back and forth that is part of that history.
And one thing from that period I'd like to ask about is Gush Etzion, which was an area outside of Jerusalem. Could you talk about that area and what happened to the people of Gush Etzion and what's happening there?
Well, so Gush Etzion was always a Jewish area. It does not fall within the categorization, and I'm talking about modern terms, settlements. This is pre-1948, these areas. They were attacked time and time again. Places like Ein Tzurim and Masuot Yitzchak and others moved around as a result of attacks. The famous attack on the 36, which was the 35, the Lamed Hey, was an attempt to rescue those villages, and because of they were under siege by the Arab villages. They were areas outside of Jerusalem that Jewish settlements, Israel, that Jews were trying to expand their reach on. And this is the seeds of the modern day Gush Etzion today, which is literally 15 minutes out of Jerusalem. I mean, it is considered to be a suburb of Jerusalem. And so those are areas that have always been there, and neighborhoods. If you look at the contemporary maps of today, they don't fall under the area of Judea and Samaria, green line, not green line. They fall within the categorization of what is known in the Oslo terminology as E1 and E2, relating to the suburb of Jerusalem that would be annexed as it related to how the what is known in the vernacular of the peace process as contiguous land, as it relates to setting up the quote unquote two-state solution and what that would look like.
I want to have time for one final question, and then I'm going to ask people to unmute themselves. But Randy Sable, our chairperson, has a very important point that she'd like to make at this time. So Randy, would you unmute yourself, please?
Sure. Don and I often talk about how that number of 6 million refugees seems to be inflated. If you look at who the Palestinian Arabs were in 1948 and those who actually left and are on the books as refugees, if you do the math, not being a mathematician, we're not sure how one gets to 6 million. Can you address that on one leg?
It's more than 6 million. And I would not use the phrase 6 million either because of what it means to us as Jews either. I mean, and according to UNRWA's documents, it's actually between 7 and 8 million. And, so if you had to define a refugee, according to the UNHCR, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, is one generation. All of us here are refugees. We all have a Jewish story and whatnot. And, of how we came in. The impetus for the inflation of numbers, which you're right, and the resurrection of the dead and the double counting and everything else that I've unearthed over the years, has to do with the fact that of the lineage aspect, the fact that, our Palestinian refuginess is hereditary. And so according to Muslim lineage, it used to be only patriarchal, but in the 1960s, they made it to also be matriarchal. They doubled the numbers right then and there. And so the numbers have continued to grow. And so the correlation of this is the fact that based on the so-called quote unquote natural growth of our Palestinians, that's when they go to Congress, and UNRWA does go to Congress and ask monies based on these numbers, which is why the United States today, putting a separate topic aside, has historically, putting aside the Trump administration, has given in the tone of $400 million a year of American taxpayer dollars to fund this enterprise. But that's where the so-called natural growth comes about. There was actually, and this is where the Obama administration tried to hide the numbers of where, what actually the numbers are of the original 48, 49. If you were to say one generation based on the birth rate of 48, 49, based on where we are today, you would amount to no more than 30,000 individuals who deserve a so-called right of return. You got 30,000 individuals, call it a day. The proposals that were given over the years were a lot more than that, even by the Israelis. The question was even given compensation. I have argued, and this is the point, that every one of these individuals, 7, 8 million, if you go 10, 15 years down, there will be 20 million, all demanding a right of return. This is basically the demographic argument for the eradication of the state of Israel based on demographics. They are not saying we're going to go back to the Palestinian state to be. We're talking about replacement. The idea of, about Tel Aviv, about, Yaffo, about, this is where, they're talking about. But this is the warfare that plays into the right of return debate and the fight. And right of return politics is seen as divine, as a divine right. And no Palestinian leader has ever offered to put this on the table because they don't feel they have the mandate to do so, which is why I've argued in a nutshell that this is the one thing that maintains and sustains the conflict from generation to generation.
Wow. Dr. Ramorowski, thank you so much for elucidating so many of these things this evening. I think we've all learned so much. Yasher koach, kol hakavod. It has been a pleasure to have you on with us tonight. And I think we've all learned so much. We look forward to maybe seeing one of your papers that would be helpful to read. And I want to just invite everyone who would like to. We have discovered at Beth Shalom that when we end programs, people enjoy, because many of us are still in isolation to a large degree, enjoyed unmuting and just giving people a chance to chat. So we're going to thank you, Dr. Ramorowski, and open
Asaf, you know me after all these years. No need for.
I'll call you Asaf. Yes, Asaf. I call your dad Mitchell too. So anyway, Asaf. Yes.
I will say, Selma. Again, it's a pleasure being here. My website is ramorowski.com. A lot of my garage of articles a lot of it is there. But I'm happy to share, any kind of articles related to refugees, any of these topics at large. But the majority of the stuff that I publish and write about is there. Bless you.
Thank you. If you let us know when you're speaking again too, we'll be glad to share it with the community. It was a very worthwhile evening. So feel free, unmute yourself and talk to some of your friends. It's good to see it's good personally for my part. It is so wonderful to see so many people. I'm seeing Beth Porter and Jeanette Norris and Susan. So many. It is so great to see you.
Thank you, everybody, for the hospitality.
Thank you. Hey, thank you, Asaf.
Thank you. Safe and healthy.
Great.
Enjoy the grandkids.
Great
Yeah.
job.
Good luck, Rob.
You should call.
Yeah. B'sha'ah tova. Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Shirkoa. Yeah, Shirkoa.
Thank you,
Good night
Selma
to the
and
Israelis.
Julie.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Great.
good night.
Thank you so much.
Rhonda, Judy,
Layla Tov.
Lila,
Go to
Thanks
bed.
for coming
Go
on,
to
everyone.
sleep.
yeah,
we are.
yeah, get some sleep.
Good night.